2:47 a.m. handcuffs. Sylvester's hands were trembling. He was supposed to be on stage the next evening, but now he was sitting on a cold metal chair in a New York police station. The charge? Theft. Absurd. Ridiculous. But real. No one knows what happened that night until morning, because those hours spent in that dark cell would change Sylvester forever. Something inside him broke, but at the same time, something awakened. The words he would speak at the Anderson Theater the next day would shock the audience. So what really happened that night, and why did this incident become the most dangerous turning point of his career? If you're curious about how this story continues, please don't forget to subscribe, because the most shocking moments in Sylvester's life haven't been told yet. Sylvester's story began in the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles, late 1950s. A poor neighborhood, a black family, and a child with an extraordinary voice. When his grandmother Julia took him to church at age 3, he sang "Never Grow Old," and the congregation rose to their feet. That voice was a divine gift. Sylvester was different from childhood. At 13, he left the church because his homosexuality wasn't accepted. He wouldn't change himself. At 15, he started going to gay clubs. He felt free for the first time. Sequined outfits, high heels, makeup. This wasn't just a costume, it was armor. He wore a blue chiffon dress in his graduation photo. It was a statement. But that courage would come at a price. And soon, Sylvester would learn that being different doesn't just liberate, it also makes you a target. In 1970, Sylvester moved to San Francisco. If you lived through those years, you know what kind of place San Francisco was. The hippie movement, the sexual revolution, the wind of freedom, everything was possible. And Sylvester was there to live that possibility. He met the Cockettes. San Francisco's Haight-Ashbury district was an experimental ground in those days. Maybe if you were there then, you remember, every street corner had a different life philosophy, a different art movement. The Cockettes put on midnight shows at the Palace Theater. Tickets were free, the clothes were crazy, there were no rules. Sylvester participated in his first show, the Radio Rodeo performance, and that night he experienced the freest moment of his life. No one on stage asked whether he was male or female. There was only art, only expression. He started living in a 2-story house on Market Street with 3 Cockettes members. Everyday rehearsals, every night shows, every morning waking up exhausted. But that exhaustion was sweet, because the sense of belonging was worth everything. Hibiscus was the group's charismatic leader and taught Sylvester many things: stage presence, costume selection, audience interaction. But most importantly, he taught him not to be afraid. The less you fear, the freer the audience feels, Hibiscus would say. And Sylvester never forgot that lesson. He played Coretta Scott King in the spoof film Trisha's Wedding. The film's critical success made the Cockettes nationally known. Andy Warhol talked about them at his New York parties. They were discussed at Screw magazine events. And finally, the big invitation came: New York Anderson Theater. For Sylvester, this was like a dream. Maybe it wasn't Broadway, but it was very close. And perhaps this would be his big break. But that dream would soon turn into a nightmare. The Cockettes went to New York. The first show was a disaster. In the second show, Sylvester took the microphone. "I apologize for this travesty." Then he sang. The hall rose to its feet. That night he understood he was enough by himself. And in 1977, a phone call came that would change everything. Fantasy Records was calling, and Sylvester's life would never be the same again. Fantasy Records was a turning point. The Step 2 album came out. The falsetto harmony with Martha Wash and Izora Rhodes went down in history. The trio was perfect. You Make Me Feel Mighty Real hit #1 on the Billboard dance chart in 1978. It went gold. Sylvester became a worldwide star overnight. But with success came fatigue and stress. The higher you rise, the more it hurts to fall. In 1979, he received the key to the city of San Francisco. a sign that society accepted him. Harvey Milk spoke at the ceremony. They were close friends, but Milk was murdered. Sylvester understood. Fame doesn't protect. But Sylvester continued on his path. He met Patrick Cowley, and the music took on a new dimension. But no one knew that those bright days would be very short-lived. And there was something else Cowley would tell him one day that would shake Sylvester to his core. Patrick Cowley was a genius of electronic music. Synthesizers, drum machines, sequencers. He was the one who created the High-NRG sound. And when he started working with Sylvester, magic happened. When Do Ya Wanna Funk came out in 1982, disco wasn't just disco anymore. Electronic, powerful, fast, modern. Dance floors were in love with this sound. It hit number 32 in the UK charts, 24 in Australia. European tours were organized. His concerts at Heaven's Super Club in London became legendary. Thousands of people waited in line for hours just to hear that voice live. The tour schedule was exhausting. Japan, Germany, Brazil, Mexico. But Sylvester didn't want to stop. Being forgotten was worse than death. In 1982, Patrick Cowley got sick. AIDS. Back then, the disease wasn't fully understood. There was no treatment, no hope, only death. Cowley deteriorated rapidly and died within a few months. Sylvester lost his friend, lost his musical partner, and faced a reality. This disease wasn't a distant threat. It was very close, very real, very deadly, and perhaps one day he too could catch this disease, but that day hadn't come yet. Now there was another problem: New York, a concert, and an arrest. By the mid-1980s, Sylvester's career was at its peak, but at the same time, financial problems were emerging. There were tensions with Fantasy Records over revenue sharing. The Step 2 album had sold millions, but the money going into Sylvester's pocket was far below what he expected. When he checked his accounts, he was shocked. He was owed $218,112.50, but he had only been paid $20,000. Where was the rest of the money? The answer was hidden in the fine print of the contract: production costs, marketing expenses, distribution fees. Sylvester's share had melted away. Legal battles began, but concerts continued. New York was a big opportunity. Preparation was intense. Blue sequin dress, special wig, platform shoes. New York wasn't easy. They rehearsed. Everything was ready, or so they thought. They arrived in New York and settled into the hotel. Everyone was excited for tomorrow's concert, but no one knew that in a few hours, everything would change. As evening approached, the team was sitting in a cafe, discussing tomorrow's performance. Sylvester looked a bit tense. The success of the first night had put great pressure on him. The audience expected more. Critics would examine his every move. One wrong step, one vocal mistake, one costume problem could leave permanent marks on his career. As these thoughts spun in his head, the waiter brought the check. Sylvester pulled out his wallet, left the money, and stood up. When they went outside, it had gotten dark. A cold wind was blowing, and Sylvester wrapped his cape tightly. After walking a few blocks, a voice came from behind them. "Stop, police." Two officers were approaching quickly, and their faces looked serious. Sylvester and his team stopped in confusion. One of the officers looked at Sylvester and spoke in a cold tone. "There's a theft complaint from the cafe you just left. You need to come with us." Sylvester couldn't believe his ears. "What theft? We paid the bill." But the officers weren't even listening. Handcuffs were put on their wrists. Sylvester's world suddenly tilted. People gathered around were watching. Sylvester felt naked and defenseless. They were put in a police car and taken to the station. Throughout the ride, Sylvester didn't speak. He just looked out the window, lost in the passing lights. A single thought circled in his head: won't I be able to go on stage tomorrow? Could this be career suicide? How will the media use this? When they arrived at the station, the real nightmare began. Because that night Sylvester would lose not just his freedom, but a part of his soul. But there was something Sylvester didn't know yet. Those hours in that cell were just the beginning. The police station was one of the bleakest places Sylvester had ever seen. Walls of cold concrete, harsh fluorescent lights, and a heavy silence everywhere. Metal doors, the sound of keys, distant shouts. This was another world. A world far from the brightness of the stage, the energy of clubs, the love of fans. When he was taken to the interrogation room, he was seated across from a table. The detective across from him scrutinized Sylvester while looking at files. There was a look of contempt in his eyes, as if the person in front of him wasn't a criminal but a monster. The detective explained the charge. He was accused of stealing coins from the cafe. Sylvester was caught between laughing and crying. Coins? Is this a joke? All this circus for a few cents? But the seriousness on the detective's face showed this wasn't a joke. The waiter had claimed that part of the tip left on the table had disappeared when the bill was paid, and had accused Sylvester. Illogical, absurd, ridiculously foolish, but real. Sylvester made his defense. He said they had paid the bill in full. They hadn't taken anything. He asked for his team's testimony, asked if there was video footage, but no one was listening. The detective took notes, asked a few more questions, and then sent Sylvester to his cell. The metal door slammed shut with noise. Sylvester was left inside alone. A narrow space, a bed, a toilet, a sink. The walls were dirty, the air stifling, the silence heavy. It was 2:47. Sylvester sat on the metal chair and put his head in his hands. His hands were still trembling. From cold, fear, or anger, he didn't know. Maybe all three. In those hours, what was going through Sylvester's mind wasn't just career anxiety. He remembered his childhood, grandmother Julia singing "Never Grow Old" at church. Back then, everything was simpler, but now he couldn't escape from another cell. And this time, the stage wouldn't save him. Time seemed to have stopped. No clock, no window, just fluorescent lights that never went out. It was impossible to sleep, impossible not to think, and the more he thought, the deeper into darkness he sank. At 13, the church pastor had told him, "God didn't create you this way. This is your choice." Sylvester had cried that day. When he got home, he had asked his mother, "Mom, am I a bad person?" Letha had hugged her son and said, "You're the best person, and God created you exactly as you were meant to be." Those words had kept Sylvester going, but now, sitting in that cell, he was asking the same question again. Am I a bad person? Is being different a crime? Does being yourself deserve punishment? From far away, sounds came from another cell. Someone was crying. Someone was shouting. Someone was praying. Sylvester listened carefully. Those voices were his voice, everyone's voice, the voice of those who were wronged, excluded, forgotten. And at that moment, something changed inside him. Anger turned to fear. Fear turned to determination. Determination turned to power. Yes, tomorrow he might be convicted. Yes, his career might end. But at least he wouldn't be silenced. At least he would tell his truth. And whoever heard it, whoever believed it, that truth would be told. As morning approached, Sylvester stood up. He went to the metal sink and washed his face. When the cold water hit his face, he revived somewhat. He looked in the mirror. His eyes were swollen. His skin was pale. His hair was disheveled. But in that reflection, he also saw something else. Power. The power to survive. And that power would get him on stage tomorrow. The handcuffs would come off, but the chains wouldn't remain. Because real chains weren't metal. Real chains were fear. And Sylvester was no longer afraid. Hours passed. Sylvester couldn't sleep. Thousands of scenarios spun in his head. What if he's found guilty? What if he goes to prison? What if his career ends? What if his fans turn their backs on him? What if his family is ashamed? As all these questions spun in his mind, he suddenly realized he was alone, truly alone. His team was outside, his lawyers hadn't arrived yet, and he was alone in this cold cell. This loneliness began to eat away at him from the inside, and at that moment he felt that feeling from his childhood again. The feeling he had the day he was expelled from the church. Unwanted, rejected, alone. The scratches on the walls were traces left by previous prisoners. Names, dates, curses, screams. Each one was a story. Each one was a pain. Sylvester touched the wall with his finger. It was cold, very cold, and that coldness seeped into his bones. He thought, how did I get here? How did I fall from the bright lights of the stage to this dark cell? He actually knew the answer. Because he was different. Because he was black. Because he was gay. Because he was brave. And courage is sometimes punished. Toward morning, the door opened. An officer came and said the lawyer had arrived. Sylvester stood up and went out. His legs weren't holding him. He had weakened from exhaustion, sleeplessness, stress. The lawyer explained the situation. Bail would be paid and he would be released. But the case would continue. He would have to appear in court. Sylvester just nodded. At that moment, his only thought was, get out of here, get away, and never come back. But freedom doesn't always bring freedom. Sometimes heavier chains come, and Sylvester would learn this very soon. 6 a.m. Sylvester left the station. His team was waiting. He said nothing, just got in the car. This city had embraced him hours ago. Now it had treated him like a criminal. Something inside him broke. Trust, hope, innocence. At the hotel, he tried to sleep but couldn't. The night replayed in his mind. Handcuffs, cold metal, the detective's looks. And suddenly, anger came. Because at that moment he understood. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was systematic exclusion. In the afternoon, the manager came. They needed to talk about the situation. The second concert was that evening and a decision had to be made. Would he go on stage or would they cancel? The manager suggested canceling. The media had heard the news and the scandal was growing. Being on stage could attract more attention. Negative attention, career-ending attention. But Sylvester gave a negative answer. Number. He would go on stage because that stage was his only weapon, and now he needed to use it. The manager objected. The risk is too big, he said. The media will tear you apart. Your career could reach its endpoint. But Sylvester didn't listen because he had learned to live with risk. He had taken risks his whole life. And now he would take the biggest risk, speaking the truth. If they wanted to silence him, he would speak louder. If they wanted to crush him, he would stand taller because he was Sylvester, and Sylvester never bowed. At 5 p.m, he began preparations. He put on his costume, that blue sequin dress, light played on every sequin. He did his makeup, bold lines around his eyes, bright lipstick on his lips, shimmery blush on his cheeks. He put on his wig, that big showy wig, and then he looked at himself in the mirror. There was fatigue in his eyes, but at the same time, a determination. Tonight he wouldn't just give a performance. Tonight he would send a message, and everyone would hear it. Backstage, the team was ready, but the atmosphere was different. Tension, anxiety. Tonight was a trial, and Sylvester was being judged. 10 minutes. Martha and Azora came to him. Are you ready? Sylvester smiled. More ready than ever. But inside, a storm raged. He murmured his grandmother's prayer. God, give me strength. Give me my voice. Give me my courage. 5 minutes left. Sylvester walked to the side of the stage. From behind the curtain, he could hear the audience's voices, conversations, laughter, anticipation. But this time, there were other sounds too. Whispers, gossip. Did you hear? He was arrested. What did he do? They say theft. Sylvester heard it, and every word pierced his heart. But now there was no turning back. The lights went out. The crowd fell silent. And then the spotlight turned on. Sylvester walked onto the stage. His steps were slow but determined, the sound of his platform heels hitting the wooden stage. Tap, tap, tap. Each step was a heartbeat. He took the microphone in his hand and looked at the audience. The hall was packed. Everyone was waiting for him. But this time the atmosphere was different because everyone knew about that night. They had heard about the arrest. They had read about it in the newspapers, seen it on television, and now they were waiting with curiosity. What would Sylvester say? A few seconds of silence. Heavy, dense, suffocating silence. Sylvester took a deep breath. His chest rose and fell, and then he spoke. His voice filled the hall, that legendary, powerful, trembling voice. Coming here wasn't easy. The silence deepened. People held their breath, because last night something happened to me. The crowd froze. Something happened that changed me forever. Sylvester stopped. He closed his eyes and relived that moment. Handcuffs, cold metal, the cell, loneliness. Then he opened his eyes and continued. I want to tell you that I apologize for this disgrace associated with me. The words hung in the air. Everyone waited. You could hear a pin drop at that moment. Sylvester gripped the microphone tighter and continued. But at the same time, I also want to tell you this. I'm here. His voice rose. I'm still standing. It rose even more. And nothing will silence me. It exploded. The hall exploded. Applause, cheers, whistles, standing ovations, screams. It came like a wave. Powerful, intense, uncontrollable. At that moment, Sylvester realized that these people believed in him. They didn't care about the accusations. They just wanted to see him. The real Sylvester. Fragile, strong, brave, human Sylvester. And this gave him strength. Tears came. But he couldn't stop them, because those tears weren't pain. Those tears were victory. The music started. When You Make Me Feel Mighty Real began to play, Sylvester opened his mouth and began to sing with that legendary voice. Martha and Izora were doing harmonies behind him. The three were in perfect harmony. The gospel choir magic enveloped the hall. And at that moment, the hall moved to another dimension. Maybe if you were at a disco concert in those years, you know, some moments aren't just music. Some moments are the revolution itself. Some moments are etched in history. The performance was magnificent. Sylvester lived every note, every movement, every moment. The stage was his temple. And that night, there was something divine there. The audience was dancing, singing, enthusiastically participating. Hands in the air, eyes closed, hearts open. This wasn't just a concert. This was an act of resistance. The resistance of the excluded, the oppressed, the silenced. And Sylvester was the leader of that resistance. At the end of the night, as he left the stage, there were tears in his eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness, but tears of victory. Because he had won. He had won against the system, against prejudice, against fear. And this victory was something no one could take from him. When he returned backstage, the team embraced him. Martha and Izora were crying. The manager was smiling. And Sylvester understood at that moment. Tonight wasn't just a concert. Tonight was a rebirth. But that night of victory, there was something else Sylvester didn't know. The course of the case would take an unexpected turn, and the real story was just beginning. The following days, the media went crazy. Newspaper headlines, television news, radio programs, everyone was talking about Sylvester. Disco star returns to stage. Powerful message from Sylvester. The name of courage, Sylvester. But at the same time, there were other headlines too. Theft charge continues. Case ongoing. Court date set. Sylvester was constantly meeting with his lawyers. Evidence was being examined. Witnesses were being questioned. And soon the truth began to emerge. The cafe's security camera footage was found. The footage showed that Sylvester and his team had paid the bill in full. They hadn't taken anything. The money the waiter claimed was missing had never been missing at all. A calculation error had been made. The waiter had counted the tip wrong, and the accusation was completely baseless. The cafe management accepted the situation and withdrew the charges. The case was dropped. Sylvester was officially cleared, but after experiencing that night, nothing would ever be the same, because some wounds leave scars even when they heal. The media had initially hyped the story as a major scandal, but when the accusations turned out to be baseless, some newspapers published apologies, small, corner, unnoticeable apologies. Some remained silent. For Sylvester, this didn't matter anymore, because he had seen a bigger truth. The media was looking for stories, not concerned with the truth. But at the same time, what happened that night had taught Sylvester something else. Resilience. That anger inside him had made him stronger. Now he didn't care what anyone thought about him. He just wanted to live his truth. And the stage gave him the opportunity to do that. In his concerts, he wasn't just singing anymore. He was delivering messages, talking about equality, freedom, love. And the audience was listening. In the mid-1980s, a new threat emerged: AIDS. After Patrick Cowley's death, Sylvester began living with this fear every day. In the fall of 1987, he developed a persistent cough. The tests done at the hospital confirmed his fear: pneumocystis pneumonia, HIV positive, AIDS. He stayed in the hospital for 5 weeks. He developed neuropathy. His legs weakened, the pain increased, but still he wanted to return to the stage. In early 1988, he gave his final concerts. In the clubs on Castro Street, the crowd shouted, "We love you," to him. In December, he took the stage for the last time at the Dreamland nightclub. 20 minutes before going on stage, he prayed with his mother. "I can't do this. I'd be glad if you'd stay with me," he said. And one last time, he sang with that legendary voice. December 16th, 1988, Sylvester James Jr. took his last breath at San Francisco General Hospital. He was 41 years old. He had donated all his music royalties to AIDS charities. Even in death, he continued to touch people. Sylvester's life was a story of struggle. That New York night was one of the darkest moments of his career. But at the same time, it was also one of the brightest, because that night he showed his true character. When they tried to silence him, he spoke louder, and the world listened. Today, "You Make Me Feel Mighty Real" still plays at Pride events, and every note carries a piece of his soul. Sylvester lived 41 years, but those 41 years were fuller than many people live in 100 years. Did the lights go out? Yes. But that night at the Anderson Theater, the words he spoke would echo forever. "Nothing will silence me." And nothing did.